Welcome everybody, good afternoon. We know that we forced you to come back very quickly after a very short coffee break, but we hope to make it worth your time. And we're going to just dive in, given that we are running a little bit behind, and to have the most time with our speakers. Now, indeed, the panel we're going to have now is called Plans, Resources and Will, How to Keep Ukraine Running. We're going to explore a critical and very timely topic, as the Master of Ceremony said, how Ukraine, in the fourth year of Russia's full-scale invasion, is still in a full-scale resistance, and how is managing to keep its country functioning under the relentless attacks that are happening daily. From power grids and fuel supplies to medicine, logistics, governance and salaries, every part of the state machinery must keep running despite ongoing drones and missile strikes. Now, as Ukraine's financial needs continue to grow amidst these extraordinary challenges and these extraordinary attacks, this discussion focuses on the choices Europe could make to ensure long-term, predictable and strategic support. We're going to dive straight in with our speakers, and it is my great honor to introduce you this panel. Here with us is Anatoly Kutsevol, Ambassador of Ukraine to Latvia, Mati Masikas, Managing Director for Europe and Central Asia at the European External Action Service. Thank you. John Swartz, Legal Advisor and General Counsel at NATO. Thank you. And Colin Smith, International and Defense Researcher at RAND. Great having you. Thank you very much for making it happen. We will try to have the opportunity for to open the floor to your questions. So please prepare them, and I'm going to make sure that we're going to get few questions from the audience. Let's go straight in. And Ambassador, let me start with you. The big question, and something that we announced at the topic of this meeting: how is Ukraine managing to keep running all the services and everything, all the daily life, maintaining the functionality and delivering all the essential services, given the daily relentless attacks? And we have seen that the attacks are only intensifying. There were over 800 drones and missiles recently launched just overnight. How is Ukraine managing to keep running?
Well, good afternoon to everyone. It's my pleasure to be today one of the speakers of this really important and timely conference, given the fact of upcoming challenges both for Europe and ongoing war for Ukraine, and the global challenges for Western against another side of this war countries. First of all, it's a real interesting question which I ask myself as well. How can we actually keep going? And always you just turn to Churchill's quotes, and if you're going through hell, keep going. And probably this is the same meaning, but in different dimensions, which every Ukrainian understood what to do, and got it personally in his own or her own way. But anyway, for the government, it was a possibility since the beginning of war to continue performing all duties because of synergy of all institutions. First of all, it's unity. Unity between the military, who became the most important part of the society to protect. Second one is responsibility of society, is that each serviceman and servicewoman need to have at least 10 volunteers to help running the war. And that I'm really happy to say that these volunteers are not only Ukrainian, but all over the world, including Latvian ones, which I really appreciate Latvian society for this contribution. And the third one is unity between Ukraine and our global partners, starting with G7, EU member states, and other partners globally, from covering all our needs which we have. And that one, the most problematic one, is budget deficit, and let's call it a war budget at all, which we've discussed several times in different dimensions and figures. So one would say, from financial point of view, you have expenditures like over 30% of GDP for the military. But in fact, we can easily say that 100 of budget is dedicated to all the needs which the country has. And you absolutely rightly mentioned that we have permanent shellings and as well as drones flying over territory of Ukraine. And the consequences of these strikes is something which the government has to also to deal with, and our partners have to deal with. And so at all in all, you are coming to the figures that you are expanding everything in order to run the country. And luckily us, we are doing it more than 3.5 years. We are around 4th year anniversary, and happily to say that this kind of example is a good example for other countries to follow. So it's not possible that you will be relying only on your state doing everything instead of you. So my key point here is the society is the key responsible for governing the state.
Let me ask you, because Ambassador mentioned now Ukraine's partners and of course the importance of that, and the European Union is at the forefront of supporting. Mr. Masikas, let me ask you, how is the European External Action Service helped Ukraine to stabilize and adapt some of these essential services, as Ambassador has mentioned now? And what lessons from the EU support initiatives can be applied to further enhance this resilience?
Oh, thank you. First of all, happy and honored to be at that panel. We are learning and adapting all the time. Of course, the Ukrainian society and the Ukrainian, as Anatoly rightly pointed out, also Ukrainian authorities, Ukrainian state is very flexible and adaptable. We do that as well. Let us take the example of energy. I mean, differently from the sometimes occurring perception, the EU can react pretty quickly. Like beginning of this year, Russia created a massive energy crisis in Moldova. In the run-up to the elections, thinking that the EU will not be able to come to help. We did, and it was managed well. For the last winter, 2024-2025, we supported Ukraine's energy systems with €2 billion. For the upcoming winter, we have mobilized 800 million. We know it's not enough. We are working on more, and the High Representative for the Common Foreign and Security Policy, Kaja Kallas, is representing the EU at the G7 plus so-called Energy Rammstein. So intense work is ongoing there. At the moment, we estimate a 400 million gap, which we are determined to fulfill. There are other ways too. We are working with the international financial institutions also to provide financing to companies, Ukrainian energy companies. I cannot stress enough the importance of the synchronization of Ukraine's energy grids with continental Europe grids. Just like every Ukrainian remembers where he or she was in the morning of 24th of February 2022, everybody from the field of energy in Ukraine remembers where he or she was 14th of March 2022, when Ukraine's energy grids were synchronized, and that has helped us to provide electricity, and at better times it has also helped us, Ukraine, to export electricity to the European Union. In that field, also the physical protection of the energy infrastructure, plain and simple air defense, is also something that is very, very important. And also, this horrible war has made clear the point of also the need to decentralize Ukraine's energy production, including in the field of renewables, and that is proceeding well too, again with our assistance.
Thank you. John, what's your take on this from your perspective, from NATO perspective?
So firstly, thank you very much for the invitation. It's great to be here. I mean, I've been sort of asked to say a word really on how NATO looks at the sort of legal and escalatory risks associated with providing assistance to Ukraine. And I think the first thing to say is that it's very clear from an international law perspective that there's nothing legally problematic with providing assistance to Ukraine. It's the victim of blatant aggression. It has a right of self-defense, and it's exercising that right compatibly with international humanitarian law. But what's happening from the sort of allied perspective is that allies are choosing to manage that risk of escalation by avoiding getting drawn into the war. And so they're looking at the international law rules and the thresholds associated with those rules that govern war, namely the jus ad bellum, the jus in bello, and the law of neutrality, to give effect to that policy and that operational preference, not because actually doing more would be unlawful, but because of that preference that is being expressed. And the lines are pretty clear here. So assistance to Ukraine, including military material assistance, it's obviously not a use of force under the UN Charter, under Article 2.4, or under the jus ad bellum. So it doesn't fall to be justified by allies as collective self-defense. No, we're helping Ukraine exercise its right of self-defense. And equally, that assistance that's being provided, it's not an attack. It's not a direct participation in hostilities under the international humanitarian law, the jus in bello. And then finally, that old body of law, the law of neutrality, which formerly had it that third states must treat belligerents impartially. That's clearly not right in an era of the UN Charter and the prohibition of aggression. We can't be expected to treat unlawful aggressors impartially in the same way as we would treat their victims. So those are the broad lines that we're navigating. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin, what's your take on it? If we are to kind of set the scene and to get your view on Ukraine managing the resources that are rather limited because of the relentless and daily attacks.
Sure. First, I just want to say thank you to Yanis and to Lato for inviting me and including me in on this distinguished conference. I think you got to look at logistically what they've been able to do is quite impressive. Starting out at the beginning of the war, I think Ukraine early on figured out that they had to integrate the civil military logistics connection, that it just couldn't be separate. And so that was something that started almost immediately, and that did help facilitate as they were going through. The other is dual use planning. So how are they using their transport assets, their rail networks to both move civil and military, and then prioritize those needs based on whether it was military or whether it was civilian. And I think, as the ambassador already alluded, the meshing of those two things helped, opposed to it being separate, where the military needed this and then civilian needed this. And instead of competing for those resources, they were able to figure out how to do that. And I think that's something just broadly as a way for resilience is something that has to be practiced more than just what's in Ukraine. I think the other thing that, as I watched and all the partner nations that were donating all this equipment, the fact that they were able to amazingly use their ingenuity to repair and maintain so many different sets of equipment. It's not like every country donated the same thing. There wasn't 2,000 BMWs going there, and so you just had a bunch of BMW mechanics or something to fix. No, you had howitzers from 5 or 6 different countries that were different types of howitzers, different types of tanks, all this different equipment that some, I'm not going to say seamlessly, they were able to integrate, but the fact that they were able to keep that going with the partner help, I think contributed to their ability to keep fighting. And then as time has gone on, they're obviously there's parts challenges with that, and so they've been able to now selectively go, no, these systems work for us, and then the partners and allies are responding to that. So not necessarily sending this piece of equipment, going with what Ukraine needs most. And I think the last thing, and this is more on the tactical level, is what the military has been able to do is they realized pretty quickly they had to decentralize their nodes of logistics. Because if you look at how the U.S. fought in Iraq, fought in Afghanistan, you build the Iron Mountain of stuff. Well, nowadays that's just a target. Precision munitions has made being able to do logistics that much more difficult on both sides of the war. And the longer range precisions, and now you have drones that are constantly flying, going after critical munitions places, where those logistics nodes. So Ukraine has, in some ways, masterfully been able to try and disperse those, hide them, because how else, given in an era where you have drones and satellites, you're still able to keep feeding and supplying hundreds of thousands of troops, and keeping those supply lines open, I think, has been pretty remarkable.
So that's again, in the other aspect of it, but still the aspect of adaptability and decentralization that in this kind of, it looks like a different aspect, but not really, because of course of the interconnectedness. But let me ask you, there's one more thing about some of the mechanisms of some of the adaptability is that when it comes to Ukraine running its services and also reconstructing the impact and the damage of Russia's attacks, the rather unusual thing for this is that Ukraine is not waiting for the end of it. The reconstruction efforts and the adaptability, they start immediately.
Well, first of all, I would like to also give you comments on adaptability, and then what Matti also shared. It's clearly understandable that it's not only about military anymore. It's you have to run everything at the same time. That's the biggest challenge ever for everyone who is working in the team. So sometimes the mining teams are working on energy infrastructure because it's not possible to move ahead, because before that you need to clear out the area. And the modern war, let's call it in that way, specifically done by Russians, they do a lot of things against civilians. And all those military which are trying to getting back territories, they're also demining the territories, they're clearing up all possible negative elements on these territories, on so-called collaborators, etc. But anyway, the system is affected at all. And they're fighting also against books, libraries, and you need to restore the life, and also to give some insight for people where they're able to come back. On your specific question, you might search for information what Ukraine does with this shelter initiative. We all know about really good examples of shelters being built in Finland or shelters being built in Switzerland. But what does right now Ukraine is something in a new approach with limited resources. So you try to reset up educational system, because you cannot do anything within 3.5 years of war without people living in this area and contributing to economy. Without contribution to economy, it's not possible to run the state and to help the military. And that is linked also not only to labor, but also to people, families and kids who might live on this territory. So in one of the cities like Zaporizhia, which is near to the front line, they started to construct underground schools. It's the same approach in Kharkiv city, and so the reconstruction itself is at the same time could be called not a reconstruction but a construction of new sites at all. A new reality, and you need to understand that if you're also doing something, that should be a stable one, including what comes to energy system. So decentralization, as Matti mentioned, is one of the key answers to this war. You cannot create big generation power plants because it's useless. One attack, or you need to have a lot of air defense systems or mobile groups to defend it. But by the end, you need to be safe on the side of generation. For that reason, you start creating smaller, probably most costly from perspective of how much the energy would cost you, and this is kind of reconstruction we are ongoing. So the answer to your question, yes, we do reconstruction at the same time, not waiting until the end of the war, because it's not possible to win the war without people.
Matti, may I ask you to comment on this, please? Also, given the EU's current framework, like, for example, Ukraine facility and coordination mechanism member states, what would you identify as the possible institutional reforms or some new financing instruments which are essential to guarantee efficient but also long-term support that could balance Ukraine's, on one hand, immediate wartime needs, but also the reconstruction goals, as the ambassador mentioned?
Indeed. That is what the EU provides. It's predictability. That's what has always been our aim. I recall very well how, when the full-scale war started, everybody, individual countries, EU member states, NATO allies, EU institutions, all did very quickly very big steps to help Ukraine. But those were obviously all ad hoc decisions. Commissioner Valdis Dombrovskis very quickly came out with a emergency macro-financial assistance and all those things. But when it was clear that this war will last, and it was clear at the latest, maybe in early summer 2022, the need for more predictable, more long-term solutions was clear. And the first of the kind actually was EU's macro-financial assistance for 2023. 18 billion. I remember very well how it came into being. That was in September, President von der Leyen visited Kiev. And actually, there were pretty heated discussions among the member states ongoing on the 2022 macro-financial assistance. Nothing on the substance, but on some modalities. And then we are at that lunch with President Zelensky, and Zelensky says, we expect to run a budget gap of 35 billion next year, and actually we would like the EU to cover half of it. And von der Leyen took a deep breath. But it happened. The EU made it happen. Then, of course, it became clear with each and every day that the situation and Ukraine's needs are going to last even longer. Then the next year, 2023, the Ukraine facility, meaning a special fund of 50 billion euro, was set up to cover Ukraine's needs for the years of 2024 to 2027 until the end of the current EU budgetary period, and that again further expanded this predictability that we want to give. It is, as most EU money, it is conditional. It is conditioned against specific reforms that Ukraine is doing. But those reforms are not only to make Ukraine a better country or a better place, but also to bring Ukraine into the EU shape, to make EU compatible with the EU legislation that every candidate country must do. Anyway, so all in all, until today, since the start of the full-scale war, the European Union and its member states have supported Ukraine with 177 billion euro, of which 65 billion is military assistance. With that, we have become the biggest military donor to Ukraine too. For the EU's next long-term budget, the 7-year budget, 2028 to 2034, the European Commission has proposed 100 billion for Ukraine. The discussions among member states are ongoing. For the years, for the coming years, you know very well that discussions on the reparation loan are ongoing, or the preparations to this are ongoing, to make use of the frozen assets of Russia, not seizing them, but making use of them. That should provide around 140 billion euro for the next years. So what we really are aiming at here, and I would say with some success, is to give Ukraine the predictability. The EU is a predictable partner.
Ambassador, I would like you to comment on that specifically, please, on the aspect of the reparation laws and the importance of that possibility for Ukraine.
Well, thank you so much, Matti, for mentioning. We partially have heard about Russian frozen assets at the opening of the conference today, and right now we hear the overall model of 140 billion project, which should be actually secured by frozen assets. It's also fine and a good idea to move ahead, and really important that we do not spend too much time on discussions, but we can move forward with it. Time is precious. I mean, we don't have normally conditions to discuss, whereas it could happen next year or in a few years. But the most important here is predictability, as Matti mentioned. So I do believe from the figures which we have publicly announced by IMF mission to Ukraine, this is really important to understand how we could cover the budget deficit of 40-45 billion for next 2 years, which we are looking forward. And then as well as this year, we are really grateful for European Commission for decisions to help us to cover the so-called drone deficit budget, and as well as with the Ukraine facility instrument as well to cover budget deficit. This is a good signal to other partners as well. So this predictability and ability to cover deficits is also investment into Ukrainians' economy to continue running, and as well as to continue fighting. And without that, it's not possible to do anything. And for the sake of Russian frozen assets, expectations are that what Minister Braja said today, all those should be used for sure for reparations, but reparations are quite bigger than this amount. If you look into our DNA, we already there about 500, 600 billion, whatever you would call, and if larger, it's about 1 trillion, unfortunately, all in all. So it wouldn't be enough. So the discussion should be even larger and bigger about the reparations in future. But to talk about reparations, we need to win the war first, to stop it, and on some strong conditions. Before that, we need to make sure that the Ukrainian army runs, and all our European partners are secured as well on their territories. I do believe this investment of 140 is investment not only in Ukraine's security, but in Europe's security as well.
And do you think, to what extent you're confident regarding the fact that you can convince all the members to...
The point is not about convincing partners, is to realize the fact where we are. So, and I truly believe that some examples of drones flying over the territory and the Russians trying to see what might happen to it. The military have to answer that question, what is going on. But in general, from political point of view, Russians are trying to test. So if they're testing and they don't see reactions, they would continue doing the same way or even to a larger number.
John, let's go into the importance of more predictable and more resilient support structure for Ukraine from the point of view of NATO and your expertise regarding what legal instruments or agreements could NATO propose or adapt to secure this more predictable structure for Ukraine?
Thank you. Well, I suppose I'm not exactly sure what you have in mind when you talk about legal instruments. And I think it is important to distinguish what NATO is doing to help Ukraine from some of these proposals that we've heard from the EU and certain NATO allies who are acting in a sovereign capacity around the sort of using of these frozen assets, although it obviously sounds very promising, but NATO is nonetheless doing lots, obviously, to help Ukraine. And we heard some of this from Ambassador Wissaker earlier on today. So one of the initiatives is getting that priority list of requirements into the hands of Ukrainians on the front line from the US inventories, paid for by other allies. NATO is also obviously playing a coordination role when it comes to broader forms of military aid and training. So that's the INSATU initiative. I'm afraid it's a bit of a sort of alphabet soup of acronyms. We've also set up a joint analysis center to help Ukraine and allies learn the lessons and implement those lessons from the war. That's JTAC. And we also have, and this sort of addresses your point about longer term planning, we have a more comprehensive assistance package, a sort of multi-year program, which is there to address broader defense sector reform and broader institutional changes. But beyond that, I would just add one other thing, which is we've also heard reference to the Hague 5% commitment to defense and security spending. And that is, of course, about strengthening allies' ability to resist armed attack, to strengthen their capacity collectively. But it's telling that when they did that, they also agreed that assistance to Ukraine could count towards that figure. I think that's because of the reality that we all recognize that helping Ukraine is going to help us defend ourselves as well. And I think ultimately that is going to be the best guarantee for assistance to Ukraine, that we know that it's the right thing to do, that it's the legal thing to do. But also there is that sort of self-interest of states because our interests are aligned.
Colin, what's your take on this? Also, I want to ask you something else. When we are talking about this predictability as well, we've discussed something prior to this session that, of course, there are so many instruments and important factors that are going into Ukraine's resilience and reconstruction at the same time with the war, but nothing beats in this case the proper defense to make sure the economy can be running.
Right. No, thank you. I appreciate that. You look at the resilience they've shown, but if we're talking about investments, we're talking about reconstruction, we're talking about the extreme dollar amounts that you're talking about going into Ukraine. If you can't defend against continued attacks, if you're starting to reconstruct or you're trying to improve the logistics, if you can't defend against that, you're going to have some that go, well, why don't we just wait till peace starts, and it's too late. As the ambassador said, the reconstruction is already ongoing, but you need to kind of defend those investments. I think some of the analysis I've done and looked at is I've been thinking for a long time is what would be a paradigm change? What would change the dynamics on the battlefield? Not necessarily just tactically. Drones have been just a new change in itself in how war is being fought. When you look at the front line. Maneuver warfare is at a pause right now. You've got 20 kilometers on either side of the battlefield where the only thing that survives are humans. Because if a tank or if an armored vehicle all of a sudden pops up, first-person viewer drones, they're coming at it immediately. So maneuver on the battlefield is kind of at stalemate. Not that that's what we want to hear, but Russia just keeps grinding and grinding 1 kilometer at a time. Not that losing 1 million soldiers to death and casualties is winning by any means, but they're not necessarily losing. So what might change it? What might defend this investment? And I think it's been mentioned before, but the only thing that keeps coming back in my mind is like a no-fly zone. How do you create a bubble, a defense over Kyiv, not necessarily over the front lines, because then you run into all the problems with NATO. You don't want to start a war that is necessarily, all the arguments were made before, I don't need to relitigate those that started in 2022 when Ukraine was asking for a no-fly zone. So how do you create something that's different? How do you get South Koreans flying, Australians flying, Japanese flying? It's kind of a coalition, a new kind of no-fly zone to create that defensive bubble. And as was talked about in the first panel, all those allies that would be participating. This wouldn't be a NATO no-fly zone. It's a coalition no-fly zone. And what that then does is protects the civilian population. It protects the critical infrastructure. All the things that we're talking about need to be improved upon or rebuilt, but you can't do that without something. And so, maybe now with President Trump finally saying that, there is the chance for Ukraine to win. So what might be that paradigm change? So that would be kind of an idea I would just throw out there. I know even Admiral Stavridis, former SACEUR, referenced it just several days ago. He referenced it in the NATO context. I'm kind of removing the NATO aspect of it because I don't want to give a narrative to Russia that says, see, this is what we've been saying all along. NATO, this is just the first phase. Then they're going to start shooting down planes, and then it's just an invasion. No, I want to kind of take that narrative off the table and make it a coalition narrative.
Ambassador, what do you think of this idea
Of no-fly zone.
of no-fly zone, closing the sky to protect investment, including the investment? Yeah.
Well, the best investment in creating the no-fly zone is to create enough air defense systems in Ukraine and to control the area by Ukrainians. This is the first one. All the rockets which you see and on daily basis, you can see how they are flying, from which place they're actually flying. So the most important is that you use all possibilities to shut them immediately, not to wait until they get to the western part of Ukraine. Probably few of the airports were discussed as a possibility to restore the civilian air flights. And in general, yes, it has been an initiative since the very beginning in 2022 to have a no-fly zone. But how you can achieve that? That's a real question. And if you're talking about just ideas, it's one side. If practically, it means that you need to have enough Patriot systems, IRIS-T, SAM-T, whatever you would like or HIMARS in Ukraine as well. So the one here is that, unfortunately, to ensure the stability and control over the flying zone in Ukraine, it's a joint effort, and the presence on the territory of Ukraine of quite big fleet. F-16 made a big difference, but we also lost a lot of time, and the number of the drones increased. So I would refer 3 years ago when the first time we saw drones flying, Shahids flying over the Kyiv city, there were a few of them. And the tactics to shut them down was totally different to what some of the colleagues present here in this hall, they witnessed it this year in 2025. It's not that easy. They are modernized and you have to use different technology. So it's a quite important run to have technologies that are based in Ukraine, but also to have enough of them. It's not only about discussions. If there was a peace deal, yes, but unfortunately we are in states that we need still to fight against the elements. No one can secure the civilian flights in such conditions, and especially if 2.5 minutes are needed to get to the western side of Ukraine and airport. So what kind of flight can have guarantees for the passengers to be on board?
Yeah, we heard earlier in the summer in Rome from President Zelensky that Russia is planning to launch 1,000 drones against Ukraine per day. So these are the levels that the way it's been increased and intensified. We're going to go towards some sort of conclusions before we'd like to open the floor for the audience. And one of the key questions for this session was whether the Europeans have fully grasped the strategic importance and consequences of their decision. And Mati, I would like to ask you on this question, because you've spent, of course, so much time and effort on Ukraine and on advocating and supporting Ukraine, if I may. From the perspective of the EU diplomacy and external action, how well do you think European policymakers understand the strategic stakes when it comes to their decisions on Ukraine?
Oh, we do. We do. I mean, look at the. I could list at least a dozen decisions that would have been unimaginable before the start of the full-scale war. And I start with the most important one. Before the start of the full-scale war, there was in Brussels and in member states' capitals, there was virtually no willingness to discuss opening the EU's enlargement membership promise to any other country that it had been done before that. Then, in the fifth day of the full-scale war, President Zelensky, in very dramatic circumstances, signed the application to join, sent it over to Brussels, and the EU promised the membership. And also with that, Ukraine opened the door for Moldova and Georgia and actually re-energized the whole EU's enlargement policy. The decisions on military assistance, financial, trade preferences, humanitarian, all that are groundbreaking, have been groundbreaking. And with that, of course, you ask whether we really grasp the importance of the situation. With those decisions, with those policies, the EU already guarantees much of Ukraine's security, with helping Ukraine to withstand and offering the perspective too. If you ask about the money, the EU member states' average defense expenditure are 2.1% today. There is a clear understanding. Should Ukraine lose, which will not happen, should Ukraine lose, it will have to double, triple, quadruple. So the importance of the situation, to the need to rise to the occasion is very well internalized.
Do you think there is even more of understanding and more of this grasping since we've seen the drone incursions into the European NATO member countries recently? I mean, things do, there is a bit of a different perspective once you have the drones spotted over Munich or Copenhagen or even in Belgium.
True. Still, I come myself from Estonia, and I think I can say that for the Estonian public, it is pretty much our war. Yeah. We feel that too. We feel, in a way, to be at war too. Not in all EU countries, maybe, fully like that. But it's coming closer to home, indeed.
So you think it is coming? Because, of course, I don't want to kind of, put a wedge between eastern part of it with a better understanding, given the closest to the borders with Russia and Belarus, given the situation and Russia's full-scale invasion and Belarus' involvement in Russia's war against Ukraine. And yet, indeed, we've seen some reaction, Colin, with the drones flying recently, as we discussed, Munich, Copenhagen, Belgium. That changes the perspective regarding what is at stake.
Geography matters, of course. Yes. But it matters less and less in today's world. So it's the realization is sinking in.
Thank you, John. What's your take on this? When it comes to what kind of consequences might Europe face from their action, or sometimes lack of their actions in supporting Ukraine? And how does NATO advise European leaders to balance the risks when framing some of the policy decisions?
Well, we're kind of straying a bit outside my wheelhouse and away from the sort of legal side of things. But I think it is fair to say that everybody is aware of what's at stake. They're sensitive to the risks, both of action and inaction, the need to balance commitments, as you say, but certainly aware of the importance to Europe of Ukraine defending itself, but also, speaking as a lawyer, to the international order, to the UN Charter. These things are at stake. And I think the best way to maintain the prohibition on aggression, the best way to defend the sovereignty of individual states is to help ensure that aggression fails. And we do that by helping Ukraine. And for that matter, it's the same, if a peace deal does become possible at some point, it's about putting Ukraine in the best possible position, a position of strength, in order to reach a fair and lasting deal.
Colin, what's your take on that when it comes to the potential strategic risks Europe could face if it undervalues the importance?
Yeah, I think there almost needs to be a constant reminder. The further away you are from the front, I mean, the Baltics know it, they live it. And that's not to say that NATO members that are sitting there in the NAC, that they don't get it, that some of the military leaders get it. I'm not convinced that the further away you get, even back in the US, that there's a full grasp of the risks. And so to remind what the risks are of Russian territorial expansion, military forward basing, what would come next if we didn't win the war? What about erosion of NATO and EU credibility? I mean, that has to be front and first and foremost looking at that credibility, because that's what Russia wants. Russia wants to fragment Europe. Russia wants to fragment NATO. Anything Russia can do to drive a wedge, and whatever it is, they're going to keep looking wherever there could be a fissure. And so that credibility has to be front and center. And I think it is amongst military leaders. I think it is amongst most of the political military leaders. I'm not necessarily convinced, but I don't live in Europe. And so I can say, though, but back in the US, it's it's not on the news every day. And so you do kind of lose track of that. I think the other risk is the rise in future conflict costs, as Matti just said. There's the dollar you're going to put into it today to try and help Ukraine, and then there's how many more dollars you would have to put into it if there's a loss. I think Matti framed it perfectly. What is it, 3.5 more times that you would have to be investing if things weren't to go the way we want them to go.
Ambassador, and finally, geography matters, and the closer you are to Ukraine borders or to borders with Russia or Belarus, the different feeling it is. And yet, even some of Ukraine's closest neighbors regarding the border are quite hard to convince on the continuous support for Ukraine in many occasions. And this is something that the European Union as a bloc, of course, also has to deal with and find solutions to overcome. How can Ukraine somehow improve in trying to convince some of the countries more, those who are not necessarily always showing the will, given their individual approach to that, and sometimes trying to bargain regarding the decisions?
Well, first of all, that's a true understanding of the situation, that if you want to help Ukraine today, that would cost you a lot tomorrow. And it's not only about few times, sometimes it could be dozens. We started our discussion with the fact how much Ukraine actually spends on the military. So the figure says 31% of the budget, but in fact, as I mentioned, it's almost 100. So because you have interconnected things. So I do believe that we have really good dialogues with all our partners and neighboring countries, and it's always heated debate because it's democracy, and everyone has the right to say and to feel about the situation in the way they would like to. But in reality, it's the possibility to assess risks. And I do believe that our closest partners and neighbors are also sitting around the table with the EU member states, and they assessing risk in general, what it might mean for Europe if Ukraine lose. And I don't think that it's a case, and we truly believe in our victory. And but for Europe, it's not about then expenditures, just expenditures. I would like to once again to underline this: the threat is not just paying more. The threat is then to fight and to be involved in real full-scale aggression. So the most important is to stop the war on our territory, unfortunately on our territory, and to gently convince the global community that it's better that we stop it again. And here, and on eastern part of Ukraine and southern part of Ukraine, and there's still a possibility to get our territory in diplomatic way. But I don't want to actually to hit up the thing that there are some big troubles with the neighbors. So probably few politicians are afraid of the possible war with them in future.
Thank you. Let's open the floor for the questions. Can we first have the first question here in the middle? Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. My name is Lolita Sigana. I am currently a seconded expert to EU advisory mission based in Kiev. And my question would be about supply side of this war. EU is discussing the 19th sanctions package currently that will attempt to target LNG that Russia is still exporting, that is going to target third countries that are re-exporting Russia's oil, and also trying to fight with the so-called shadow fleet. Do you think this has a potential to finally put a stop to this supply side for the Russian war machine? And while the panel is thinking about your answers to this question, million-dollar question probably, I would also like to use this opportunity and tell about an event that we will have at 7:30. We have brought together women leaders from civilian security sector in Ukraine, and full-scale invasion has really mobilized women leadership in this sector. So please come and listen to it. But now to the question.
Well, that was a
Alexandra,
good one. Okay, that was a good one. That's
thank you
thank
for
you for
letting
that.
me advertise.
Yeah, well, I couldn't, you know, I mean, no, I couldn't do that.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you very
appreciate
much. Thank you. Ambassador, would you want to comment on the possibility of...
Well, first of all, it's an issue of sanctions. I mean, the unique instrument which is working over the Russian economy and the ability for Russia to continue the war is sanctions. And it's really good to mention that EU, together with our key partners, imposed quite a big number of sanctions, and 19th package should be additional element which will help us to fight against the Russian economy and also shadow fleet, which you mentioned. This is a really important step forward. In my mind, we should be discussing the overall closure of the Russian borders and the closure of the trade. Unfortunately, if you look into the components which are used for the production of Geran 3, for example, recently been shelling in territory of Ukraine, you will find out quite a big number of different components coming from different our partner countries. And this is a problem. So no matter how many sanctions we are imposing, then these components still arrive to Russia. That's a problem. So talking about Russian fleet, we should be aware that this is a possibility to run economy, and second one is still possibility to do some hybrid attacks as well. And that one should be considered from two different angles. One, security. Second one is for Russia to continue the war. I truly believe that for both Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, this is a big challenge of having a border. And for third countries to transport a lot of things through their territory coming from the Central or Southern European countries to not to Russia, but transiting Russia. And by the fact they just stopping somewhere in Russia. And this is the European Union and Commission at all should be focused on immediately, because it's a possibility to continue the war.
Would you want to comment on the next sanction package as mentioned?
The very fact that...
Because that's the first very time when it comes to LNG as well.
The very fact that the current package is 19th tells you very much about this war and about the response. First of all, just like just like those who marched under the flags to World War I in the summer of 1914, they did not realize how long this is going to last. We started reacting. We didn't know how long it's going to last. We adapted. We are constantly adapting, seeing not only like, oh, we need to hit here more, but also adapting in a way that we see we see Russia adapting too. So new loopholes to close. So very much as you may have seen, focusing on cryptocurrencies now. More and more working on the sanctions circumvention, and not entirely without success. You also see that the geographical scope of the EU sanctions is widening. We want to close that holds there too. But it is, of course, very much, and the shadow fleet is one example of that. It's a very much a pretty classic game of a criminal and a policeman. They add that all the time. The shadow fleet first went under certain flags, and then we started targeting them. Then the flags were changed. Then protection teams were brought onto those vessels, and etc. That also explains why there has been so many packages, and probably will be more.
There you have it. Yes, can we have the question here, please? And then I'm going to go there.
Thank you. Hello, thank you very much for the very good session. My name is Alina Rado. I am an investigative reporter from Moldova. And my question is about separatism. One day Crimea should be back, and one day separatist regions from Georgia should be back. We have Transnistrian region. Now, from yesterday in Transnistria, there is a difficult situation because Russian gas doesn't go anymore through Ukraine. Russia doesn't pump any new money there, so they do not have gas, little electricity, and little energy, many other problems. My question to you is, do you see, not only to Mr. Ambassador, but also to European and international guests here, do you see any good opportunity now to solve this separatism problem in Moldova and having a solution for the next time with Ukraine and the other regions? And do you see any solution to get Russian army out of our territory? Thank you.
So this is the solution to separatism that you mean, is actually kicking the army
Yes.
out. And Transnistria, of course, that's been over 30 years at this stage, as the first case of it.
Yeah, it was not solved. There was no political will. Finally, Moldova and Ukraine are cooperating very well on many matters. And it would be a nice occasion or a great occasion to cooperate on ending separatism and getting Russian army out of our countries. Thank you.
Thank you for the question. I do want to ask this question to all the speakers on stage. Also, of course, given that Moldova just had the elections with absolutely unprecedented attempts to meddle with those elections coming from Russia. Who would want to start? Because that's such an important issue when it comes to... Colin?
Sure. I think if you're looking for opportunities, it's to try and just constantly keep remind the people in Moldova of what Russia has and hasn't done for them. And then where do they see more support coming for them into continuing to support Russia, for those that do continue to support Russia or Russian troops there. I look at my time in Georgia, and just before the Sochi Olympics, the Opcos were promised this, you had reconstruction going on, and then as soon as the Sochi Olympics were over, there went the flow of money stopped. Then it just became, we're going to use this for a military base, we're going to use this for our own, and really just forgot all about the Opcos people. I look at it as a very similar situation, is Russia's going to use this situation to whatever advantage they can with what's going on with the war in Ukraine. But the reality is, in the long term, do they really care about the people there? And I would probably argue no. So yes, this is absolutely an opportunity to just keep remind them and make them the decision. It's their country. They live there. But look at what's happened in Crimea. Look at other places where Russia has invaded and taken over, and then ask those people, are their lives any better there now than they were before Russia showed up?
Ambassador,
Well,
on Moldova.
well, first of all, I would like to congratulate people of Moldova for the really great elections which they had recently, and I do believe this is an important period of time when you have, together with Ukraine, candidacy to join the European Union, as well as you have once again re-elected president and a new parliament, and you have a quite good European-oriented majority, Western-oriented majority, and this gives you all political preconditions to start your internal discussions. I do remember that in 2022 we had quite heated discussions and debates about who did what to support Moldova and Ukraine. But everything ended with a clear and normal solution. So Moldovan politicians should take care about all their internal aspects, and Ukraine stands there to help when Moldovan politicians would ask to do so. I truly believe that for Transnistria there is a peaceful way of resolution, at least what different experts are saying about it, and I don't think that it's about military solutions these days at all.
Thank you. We're going to have one more question coming from there, and we're going to have to finish and wrap this session up.
Hello, Robert Strasums, Latvian Armed Forces. So, as Clausewitz once written, there's no unlimited wars. And clearly, there is no matter what on the EU table. Ergo, there is logical question. If unconditional surrender of Russia is not on the table, what actually is? And I would like to direct this question to Mr. Massikas. You mentioned predictability. From EU perspective, what is EU's task, intent, and what's the most important, if we are considering long-term support, expected end state of the war?
Good. That's a simple one. Ukraine's victory and restoration of its territorial integrity in 1991 borders. Thank you.
Dear speakers, would you want to comment on the question? I mean, I know you just gave the line that I absolutely feel like I have to finish this session, but I will still give. Let's do a quick round. Thank you for the answer. Let's do a quick round of all the speakers with your brief concluding thoughts. Colin.
I just go back to, kind of an old adage, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. If you teach him how to fish, then you feed him for life. Ukraine doesn't need to learn how to fish. They know how to fish, but we got to help defend them while they're fishing, if you get the analogy. They can take care of themselves and have been for 3.5 years, but they still need support. And they're tired. But you can't mistake being tired for not having a will to fight. And I think that sometimes people look at exhaustion. You hear about the exhaustion, you hear about the populace being exhausted, but that doesn't mean that the will to fight has gone away at all. If anything, it's still, the resolve is there. And so, I use kind of a sports analogy, is that when you're tired, you look to the rest of your teammates. You look to some inspiration, some energy coming from somewhere else to kind of pick you back up and get you back in the game. And I think that's what the U.S. and West can do for Ukraine all the time. They have to be providing the energy to Ukraine that is tired, that's exhausted, but has not lost the will to fight, to just keep them going. And then that will re-energize them and their own people. But the people need to see that Europe and the US are behind them.
John, your brief concluding remark.
So, we've outlined very clearly how crucial the support for Ukraine is, but just sort of coming back to that point about energy and sort of supply side challenges, whether it's the shadow fleet, whether it's secondary sanctions, or whether it's actually demand signals closer to home, I think it's really essential that we do turn off that spigot, because this is clearly contributing to Russia's war chest, and this is clearly financing Russia's war of aggression. So in addition to helping Ukraine, we also have to take measures along these lines.
Marty, finally. One brief thought, yeah.
The EU is there with the Ukraine, for Ukraine, and guarantees already much of Ukraine's security.
Ambassador?
Well, a few comments I really liked about fishing. So, first of all, I would like to everyone to understand we are in one fishing boat. Secondly, time is precious. And third one, believe me, there is no other way than to support the stop of the war on our territory. And there won't be any other type of discussions after it.
Anatoly Kutsevol, Ambassador of Ukraine to Latvia, Mati Masikas, Managing Director for Europe and Central Asia at the European External Action Service, John Swords, Legal Advisor and General Counsel at NATO, and Colin Smith, International Defense Researcher at RAND. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alexander.